Mm-hmm.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay, hello. So hope everybody can hear me. I'm Dimitrios Kechagias, and as you heard, I work at Sperum. And those in the UK will probably know what it is, or what Sperum is. For the rest, it's a room and roommate finding service for the UK and the US. It runs on a Perl backend, so it's developed by a great Perl team we have here in Manchester. And today I'll talk to you about a module that I briefly introduced last year in the Pittsburgh conference. I will attach this presentation to the talk page, and the last slide contains a link to an archive with all the files and demos I will use. So what is Test2 Aggregate? Very simply, it's a module that runs existing test files as subtests of a big test. This is the heart of what it does. And I initially developed it because I wanted to profile like a big amount of small tests together. And I noticed that the overhead of reloading Perl every time was much greater than I expected. So I thought somebody must have done a module that is good for testing to take advantage of that. And there are a couple of modules that do it, but they went, I guess they wanted to try to do too much, and they messed with the test builder internals. So they no longer work, especially if you have a modern test framework. And so I continued building on my module and did not draw any inspiration from those old modules, which makes it a bit different in how it works and makes it suitable for more things. Traditionally, I will start with a synopsis. There's just the run tests, the run tests command to run your tests in a list of directories right here, and give you in a nice hashref the results of the tests, if they succeeded, failed, how long they took. So trying directly like this to run the entire T directory is not a good idea for if you have an existing large test suite, because not all tests can be aggregated, so many will fail, and some can even cause lockups and cascading failures. So you could try, Dirs here takes a list, so you could try subdirectories, or a better idea is to use lists instead, because with lists of files, you can just edit the lists without moving around test files or anything like that, so it doesn't affect your existing workflow. Now, there are several caveats. So as you understand, there's no separate namespace for tests. I tried doing something like that, but it didn't work very well. So we'll just keep the no separate namespace, and it means that you have, for example, redefined warnings if you use the same names for subs, or you have to take care of overrides that would expire when the test was ending. You don't want them surviving for the next test and things like that. Begin blocks work a bit differently now, because once they're loaded, usually we use global overrides there, and they will stay on for the rest of the tests, and the same end applies before the next test. So I have no idea why you'd use test class personally, but if you do, it doesn't work with Test2 Aggregate. And if you use test more, test builder, you might see some issues. You should know now that the test builder is simply a wrapper around Test2, so there's no real need to use it. But in any case, example of issues is that as I showed you that the aggregator reports whether in the hash, whether the test passed. If the tests were using test more and they failed, but they failed in a way that didn't run any tests, the test2 subtest will think they passed. So your statistic will be off. And mixing test frameworks can cause really fine warnings. If you use test2 and then test more, they obviously redefine the same things. And you cannot use plan in the individual tests. You cannot plan for a number of tests, but you can plan if you aggregate them in the aggregated test. Now, what I didn't do last time is show how you would go about aggregate and test suite. And although first I will run the test I ran last time, which is I already worked on mousse and found that 180 something of the tests, there are 300, over 300 in total, run under the aggregator without any modification. Some of them might have some warnings, but in any case, this is how they run on the left with proof. And if you're using test2 and YAF, which is the equivalent for test2, the test2 harness, you can preload mousse, which makes the mousse tests much faster. So it will load those 180 tests to see the comparison, how much faster it is. So it took 46 seconds with prove. Let's see YAF. It's much faster. Okay, I'll go ahead and just run this, which will run them under the aggregator. Okay, wait, maybe wait. Okay, 21 seconds. Let's see, aggregated. Five seconds. So for tests like this, the difference is great. And let's go try out. Let's try. Nope, sorry. Here. So let's try using Bongelicious, which is also a test. It's also using test more, so it's not. It has some issues that I briefly mentioned. We'll see them here. So first, I do. I create a list with all the test files. I will just actually. Yeah, so all.lst, and I will run this. And here I have a printout of any tests that pass. So we will use this later. But first, let's see if they can actually pass. So there is the first lookup. Now, Control C, there are some tests that lock up when aggregated. Where's my list? Here. So I can just delete them from the list file. But because we don't have much time, I know from the previous run that there's another 3. I will remove all of them. So I will have a new list there, init list now, which is which is 99 tests out of 103 total. We'll run those. I switched to a silent keyboard for this talk, and it's not my keyboard. Okay. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Yeah, the demo normally was faster, but I see that Zoom is using a lot of my CPU. Huh. Okay, so 37 failed, and the successes are written in the pass list here. So I will try to run the pass list now. Okay, surprisingly, if you're not used it before, some tests still failed from the ones that reported as pass. That's because of the problem I told you about, the difference between the subtest of test2 and test more. So simply though, I will go to the pass list. There are the numbers of the tests, which are the line numbers. You can just comment them out. Line 47, line 59 and 60, and lines 67, 68. Let's, whoops, save it. Okay, and this should be it, but let's go ahead and show you, yeah, everything passed. So let's go ahead and show you what happens with test2 test suite. So I looked at the test2 um, suite modules that use test2 on cpan and found the markdent had over 30 tests, so maybe a useful one. I'll try first to run the entire directory. It runs in 4 seconds. I will be bold, whoops, and add test warnings. So I don't want it to produce any warnings either. So test2 aggregate with test warnings. Whoa, sorry, that's the previous one. So test2 with warnings, we test for warnings and give you a summary at the bottom. So this is a warning. If we open this test, yeah, it was generated by this Zilla, and it's a test more test. So if we convert this to and I guess testing. Let's know. Yep, it finished. And if you're curious how long it takes with regular proof, it won't take 4 or 5 seconds. It will take, okay, we don't have time. It will take more than half a minute. So yeah, this is the process I followed. There are many approaches to this, to how to integrate the test. I can add some tips for specific issues you might have when aggregating. So if you use common names for subs in your test, you might hit a lot of redefined warnings. One way to deal with them is to deal with them at the level of your test bundle. The way we do it is use import into. And this environment variable is provided by test2 aggregate, so it only applies to those tests. Now, if your app uses exit, often you might want to override it with a begin statement. You can use test trap instead if you want to aggregate the test. And this is how you use test trap to avoid warnings for multiple loads. And in general, you can take advantage of the fact that the aggregated tests will run in sequence. So you can do things like if you can't run some of them in parallel because of critical sections, you group them smartly so that you avoid the critical sections and you parallelize your tests. If you're using a Test2 harness, the category immiscible is something you've done before. So ideally, your test suite is parallelizable, so you'd have many parallel aggregated tests running. So you try to keep them balanced because you don't want to have one very long one that keeps on chugging along on a single thread while everything else is finished in parallel. We added the exclude list to YAF, the Test2 harness, exactly for Test2 aggregate. So you can still add the preload for non-aggregate tests into your suite, but you use this, the exclude list, to exclude everything in that is aggregated. And we actually, in Sperum, we use a wrapper which adds the nicer star dot, the wildcard support. And we use this and we preload our modules at the same time. You can copy it and modify it if you want. So how does it work in practice? At Sperum, we have a very large and very optimized set suite. So we run it on 16 parallel threads on a decent server, and it takes just 4.5 minutes to finish with proof. If we preload most of our modules, it does take just 3 minutes, which is good. However, we managed to run 82% of our tests under the aggregator. They're split into 12 groups to run in parallel, and it takes the runtime time to 75 seconds. So with that time, we have a CI, a continuous integration environment, and it's a perfect match because whenever somebody pushes a change in any branch, the test suite, the entire test suite is run, and you get an almost immediate feedback. So you catch any issues early in the development cycle, and your code is always ready for release, fully tested. And we send the test feedback to Slack, and it's integrated in GitHub as well. But aggregated tests also can send statistics. So we wrap it and send it to a database. And you can, on the Slack message, you can click to see in a little web page the timings of your tests, or you can explore historical performance to see when tests went slower or faster. And there are other benefits in using the module. Apart from grabbing the statistics, there's a stats output option that just dumps them in a file. And I already showed you test warnings. It's very useful for us because we want groups of tests to produce no warnings, and you just enable it and it does the test for you and summarize the results. And the initial reason I wrote this, I started writing it, is to profile a big number of small tests, which by themselves don't really make sense to profile them, but I have found that I can find bottlenecks that I didn't know they were there. And it's also great for testing flaky tests because it runs them much faster, so it can repeat, and it has a built-in option to repeat until failure. That's the repeat -1. And further upon that, we built a little program which is simplified here to detect parallel test conflicts. Like if you have a test that failed randomly because something else is conflicting with it, because of a critical section that you're not really sure where it is, you can run a test repeatedly against the entire test suite. And I can give you a demo of that here. So I have 3 tests that try to write on the same file, 2 of them. And I will run the file I showed you. It's a simplified version of what we use against the entire test suite. So it will run everything except this test file. And there was a failure and it bailed. So you see that the last...
We have 1 more minute.
Yeah, it's my last, yeah. So the last, you can see that the second test is the last one that was run. It tried to run. It was launched. So this is the one that that has the critical section. It might be the previous one. And sometimes there's some lag sometimes, but if you have thousands of tests, you can see which 1 or 2 are the culprits. I guess that concludes my talk. And you can, I will upload the slides so you can download the files if you want to play with them. And time for questions, I guess. Thank you.
Him to unmute, but don't really.
Right. I'm sorry. I was hitting applause rather than question. Sorry. Maybe I hit the wrong button. Sorry.
Thanks for the applause.
Yeah.
Okay. No more question. We have another one too. So Mike, I just asked you to unmute.
Actually, I was also just clapping. So great presentation.
Oh, thanks.
Okay. Okay.
Hopefully
okay.
you will be able to, it was enough to help you use the module and benefit.
Felipe has a question.